Hello everyone, welcome to this week's live stream. My name's Caitlin and I'm a visitor experience host here at the National Museum. I'm here today with my colleagues, Candy.
Hi everyone.
And Sarah.
Hello.
Now we're here today to talk to you about one of our favourite subjects, which is the Garden of Australian Dreams. But before I get started, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country in which we're meeting upon today, the Ngunnawal, Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Now, as visitor experience hosts here at the National Museum, we're normally in the galleries interpreting the objects, the stories and the spaces for you. But like many of you, since we've been in lockdown, we've been at home working and unable to bring you the stories that we normally would. So when we got asked to do a virtual tour of the Garden of Australian Dreams, we were really excited. Now, I'm going to play you the pre-record in just a minute, but while we're playing, if you've got any questions about what you're watching, please don't wait until the end. Pop them in the text box below and we'll get to them shortly. So let's have a look. Hi there, I'm Caitlin and I'm a visitor experience host here at the National Museum of Australia. I'm here today in the forecourt of our museum with my colleagues, Sarah and Candy, who are just down below us in the Garden of Australian Dreams. And we're going to be talking to you today about the museum's biggest object, which is the garden. And while the museum's been closed, we've been busy creating new gallery experiences for you. So while we're in the garden, you might hear some construction noises. And that's just us creating new exhibitions for you to enjoy soon. The garden itself is part of the wider building, which was designed by Howard Raggett, who believed that Australia doesn't have just one linear history, but many histories, like pieces of rope that intertwine with one another over time, creating the stories that we have here in our collection. One of the key aspects of Raggett's rope design is the museum loop here behind me. It represents the rainbow serpent, which is a key figure in many Indigenous cultures across Australia. As one of Raggett's ropes of history, it's flowing and creating itself. Richard Weller and Vladimir Sitar used this concept of history being ever-changing and evolving in their design for the Garden of Australian Dreams. Located in the centre of the museum's galleries, Weller cleverly designed the space to be the same size as the MCG, an arena where Australia's histories could continue to play out and evolve over time. Standing here in the forecourt, we're actually members of a crowd, and right here beside me is the row in front of us, looking down into the arena and watching the histories as they unfold. Weller even included a clever design behind me, the Mexican wave. As well as being a fun-loving crowd, Weller also designed this element to pay respects to Indigenous elders past, present and emerging, so that those arriving to the museum for the first time can look down into the garden and perhaps imagine things from a different perspective. Now, if we have a look through one of these holes, I think Candy might be down in the garden waiting to tell you some more.
I'm standing in the Garden of Australian Dreams. So this courtyard space was designed by Richard Weller and Vladimir Sitar of Room 413, and they worked in collaboration with Architecture. I'm going to talk to you today about a major aspect of the garden, the map. This map covers a central aspect of Australia, so it runs from Cape York all the way down to the Great Australian Bight in South Australia. Each step apparently equates about 100 kilometres across the country. You may have noticed that this map is in fact not one, but many, laid on top of one another. So it's like a big palimpsest of time, a big chattering narrative. So with that in mind, where do we start? I'm thinking I might start with these green dotted lines here. These green dotted lines and the sections of land that they mark out concern Indigenous Australian land rights and entitlement. So this is a critical part of the process of reconciliation, recognising people's rights, and there were events in the 90s that brought about a really important turning point in Australian history and in our Australian legal system. You might notice there are different coloured patches of ground as well. You've got olive green, mint green, taupe, even pink, and these form part of the vegetation map that you'll find here. Also descriptions of terrain such as short wiry grass, long tussock grass, mulga scrub, salt bush, rainforest. They're all part of this map. You will also walk around and probably find Proterozoic, Jurassic and Cretaceous markings that are part of a soil and geology map. You may have also noticed these big grey lines with the numbers on them. They're actually isobars, and they give us a snapshot of the weather as it was on Australia Day in 1998. With that, we've got other writing on the ground here from a Japanese tourist map of Australia. So we've had a look at maps of Australia and places across Australia. Of course, there's peopling across Australia, and we have here, wherever you see this kind of writing, all across the map of Aboriginal Australia. So this was published in 1994, and it was the collaborative effort of David Horton and the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. It's a living map of a continuing culture, so it paints a picture of Australia as being a nation of nations and a country of countries. And with that in mind, we also have here, adapted to the ground, many languages spoken across Australia with the word home or house. And this information comes from the Australian census that was conducted in 1996. So there's indeed more than one way to call Australia home. So if you happen to know the word for house or home in another language, you might indeed find it written here. So what does it all mean, and how can we interpret this space? Well, there are some phrases that come to my mind, such as home is where the heart is, putting Australia on the map, history is written on the land, walk a mile in my shoes, you are welcome to leave footprints on our land. As Australians, it seems that we inherit Australia's deep history, and we are all custodians of its fate. This garden speaks of the dreaming and of the dreams of many. And now we're going to cross over to my colleague Sarah, who has a little more interpretation about the garden.
Thanks, Candy, for explaining the overlay of the garden and interpreting the themes surrounding it. Behind me here is one of the most striking features of our garden. Most visitors come here and interpret it as a big white cube or a blank canvas. What it actually represents is the Great Australian Dream to own a block of land with a house, a palm tree and a pool. When visitors come here, you tell them to interpret their own dreams onto that blank canvas. Another dream that was held was by the early European explorers who thought Australia would be a great tropical paradise. This is what our palm tree in the garden represents. Thank you for coming on this tour of the Garden of Australian Dreams with me. I hope you can come soon and interpret all of this yourself. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. We hope you enjoyed watching that just as much as we enjoyed filming it. So we've got some questions starting to stream in now, but I'd like to start with one, which is a common question that we tend to get when people first walk into the garden. And it is, what was the idea behind creating such a complex space within the museum? Now, Candy, I know you've got some great ideas about this.
Yeah, I think most of us hosts do, because so often, pretty much every day, we will see people coming in and encountering this garden and just going, what, why? And it's just great to give people orientation via the map, but to first of all say that it's a symbolic landscape. So it's not your average garden, it's a garden of the mind. There are many ways you can sort of explain it, but you're invited to come in and explore it physically and feel immersed. It's a very experiential space, and you can see yourself as part of this history and of the story that's never done being written. So that's the idea.
And Candy, I've also heard you talk about the garden as a timeline of time immemorial, which I think is a beautiful way of thinking about it, because in Australia we don't often think about our history as reaching back millennia to pre-Jurassic times even, and that's all recorded in the garden, which you touched on in the video. And I think it's a great way, it's sort of juxtaposed between the garden and the building, which is, the building is based on a timeline between about the 1950s, when Australia really started thinking about having a national museum, and 2001 when the museum was open. And the architecture of the building is really built around the sorts of things that were happening in our economy, our politics and our society during that time. Things like reconciliation and a push for a treaty. And I really like how those two work together. It's also International Museum Week this week, and today's hashtag is Museum Moments. Now, I think that that's a great thing. It's sort of a great example, I guess, of museum moments, because if you think about an object or a part of this museum as a moment in time, the concrete parts of the garden that were built almost 20 years ago and a moment in time, and they are still relevant today. We still find ourselves interpreting them in terms of the things that are happening in our society and our economy today, which is really exciting. Now, we've got a question here from Shakri. What does the body of water represent in the garden? Now, I've got some interpretations about this, and I think, Candy, you might have some as well. But it's about reflection. It's about reflecting on who we are as a nation and being able to look at yourself and see yourself in our history. And this building and this place is really about all of us having a part in Australian history, even as it unfolds. I think it also talks a little bit about the flip, the under-earth side, the reflection that was seen when the English and the French came down to Australia and saw things very oppositely to what they were in the Northern Hemisphere, like a white swan being black in Australia and those sorts of things.
Right, that's very, very true. And I'm wondering what body of water they're talking about exactly, because there's more than one. There's one.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the big body of water. There is a Gulf of Carpentaria, but there also is, we have a little swimming pool in our dream house, as I talked about in the video.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Little kidney-shaped pool.
Yes.
Now, we've got a question here from Charlene Spiller. What is your favourite place on the map? Well, Candy, I'll start with you.
Oh, I don't know. I can't pick just one. Do you know, maybe for me, it's about constantly discovering new things that have just been sitting there, looking me right in the face for years. And I think recently I researched what on earth certain markings meant, RL followed by some numbers, and they're to do with reduced levels. And as little as I've begun to know about that, it's to do with surveying land and site planning, so to do with reduced levels relative to one another. So I just found that fascinating. That's another massive avenue for me to get my head around.
That's interesting that you say that about surveying, Candy, because Charlene's actually put through another question, which is, what do the poles represent?
Oh, okay. Again, which ones? But I'm presuming you mean the red and white poles. If so, they are surveyors' poles or surveyors' staves. So again, you've got these overarching themes. Themes I didn't mention before, which will always resonate with the themes in our galleries of land, nation and people. And then within the garden, you've got themes concerning communication, always venturing to further understand one another, and boundaries is a massive one. So, yeah.
I also like that the surveyor's poles, to me, you might notice that on top of the hill there's also different fences and things. And to me, the surveyor's poles and the fences, they talk about the differences between land. So our Indigenous people have this relationship of reciprocity with the land, so giving to the land and the land giving back. And I think that relationship with land changed a lot after colonisation, with this idea of surveying the land, dividing the land, putting a fence up, showing what's mine and yours, and that obviously has played out a lot between the different cultures of history, the different ropes, if you will, from Howard Raggett. From Grace, what is your favourite feature in the garden? Sarah, I know you have a favourite feature in the garden.
Yeah, I do. It actually does feature in the video, but you might have not noticed. It's a statue that sits on the dream house. It's called an antipodeum. In Greek, that means opposite side. What it actually represents is how when European explorers thought about this Great Southern Land, they thought the people down here would be backwards or different. So the antipodeum has backwards feet and backward hands because they thought they would have to walk upside down on that land.
And that plays in really nicely with the themes in the water, the body of water and reflections and upside down and things like that. So our next question is from Heidi. What birds do you see in the garden? Now, Candy, what are those parrots that you often talk about in the garden?
They're tiny little green parrots, but they're indeed called red-rumped parrots. So you'll see on their backs a beautiful little shock of red. That's how you'll know that you're looking at the red-rumped parrots. And as is customary, the boys are a lot more striking and brightly coloured than the females, but you'll see them walking around together in their pairs. And I do recall, at least on one occasion, seeing several pairs and just thinking, oh, how cute. And then, of course, they started going, go away, this is my territory. So I was like, yeah, they're cute, but they're still feisty. Anyway.
And I do, us here, I guess, we're just three of the hosts here. We have many hosts on our team, and we do have a couple who are real bird lovers. So although we can only talk about the red rump parrot, if you have any questions about the birds, please put them in the comments, and our other colleagues will actually love to answer them for you.
Definitely. We've even got some hosts that have developed a bird watching pamphlet. So it's a wonderful way to look out for particular birds that frequent the garden.
And I believe one of them has actually just created a bird watching from home pamphlet, so you can actually find that online as well.
Awesome.
We have another question here from Hannah. What is the most common thing that children want to know about the garden? Sarah, what do you think?
I think mostly they ask about the mound because they love running up and down it. I'm not sure other than that though. What do you think, Candy?
Yeah, the mound. Yeah. I mean, it is a massive feature, and we didn't even really cover that. I was standing on the thing in the video. So yeah, they do definitely ask about the mound.
Yeah.
A lot of people will interpret that mound as being Uluru. Indeed, it's very highly interpretable as being Uluru on this central aspect of Australia, very much in the centre of that map. It's not necessarily Uluru. Prescribed meaning is not strictly necessary is a very good quote out of a book that's published about this museum. The mound does have this sort of red mottled earth around the side of it, and it has fences and boundaries on top of it. And what else? You said something interesting about the mound not long ago.
I did, but I think we've got another question coming through. I'm just mindful of our audience. David S. says, so many layers of meaning that I will need to explore next visit, and we would love to have you, David. Is it difficult to maintain those vibrant colours in the Canberra climate?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, particularly during a hailstorm that we had, there was a lot of damage to the colour that hailstones chipped off. Yeah. Yeah,
we used to actually have, sometimes, because of the mound, we would have to close the mound off during the rain because sometimes it washes away all the tread. But I'd have to say we haven't had to worry about that for quite a while until recently.
I believe it is being repainted now as well.
Yeah. Now we have a question here from Jan Kilsby. How were the map sections chosen? I don't know the answer to that. Do you guys know the answer?
I don't. In the video, I did know where a lot of the languages came from, languages that were depicted on the ground. So the Aboriginal languages were from a real map of Australia, real maps that have been adapted to the ground. The other languages that are spoken in Australia are just a tiny snippet of many that were recorded in 1996. So that number's probably grown now. So I don't know why they chose the maps that they chose, but there was a lot of focus on mapping of Australia at that time. So it's like what Caitlin was saying about this focus on decades leading up to the opening of this place. So I don't know exactly why, but I think it's just this really wonderful, complex and comprehensive spread of different maps demonstrating this incredible spans of time and diversity.
So we have another question here from Nicholas. Was the map here in 2001? Did you add or change borders since? Now, the map, interestingly, has been here since 2001, and Richard Weller, who was the designer of it, is a big fan, and so we actually haven't changed much of the garden at all. It has been the same since 2001. The only thing I think, and correct me if I'm wrong guys, the only thing I think that has changed is that we recently added a statue into the water feature.
Yeah, that is correct.
Yeah, beautiful brolgas.
Yes, the brolgas.
Brolga statue. The other thing is, because we're dealing with some natural aspects of the garden, and nature loves to just do its thing irrespective of what we try to do and transform our landscapes. The fallen timber that you may or may not have seen in the water has had to be changed out once or twice, and the brittle gums as well. I don't know if they've been changed, but the trees have indeed grown and changed themselves. Yeah.
So now we've got a question from the studio. Why is it called a garden when there aren't many plants in it? Now we often get this question, and I think Sarah, you can answer that one.
Yes, it is a great question. So Kenny and Caitlin have already kind of talked about that, about how complex and symbolic the garden is. Most people, when they do come down to the garden, they do think there's no nature really, but when you do think about it, we do have our trees. So what is happening within the garden space, why they designed it like that, it's meant to draw that connection between, to make it a display area. So they draw the connection with nature and with art, essentially, to make it a stadium where history is evolving. So in particular, we do have our Italian elder trees. So they're really important. They're symbolic of our migrant community. So as they actually curve around the building, at the very start, they lean out away from the continent. When they're leaning out away from the continent, that's meant to represent how at the beginning of their journey to become Australian citizens, they feel still connected to their home country and that culture. As they come around the building, they lean in towards the continent, and that's them planting their roots in Australian culture and
Calling Australia home.
Yeah, definitely. And they particularly lean in at the dream house, so it connects the dream house and those trees. So yeah, you really see that connection.
Yeah,
it's true. Yeah, and with those other elements too, the other trees, I guess it is not really what you would expect. Sort of it challenges people's expectations of a garden. It's a place, sort of a fertile ground for ideas and debate and our story to unfold. But also, the more you look, the more trees you might see, and you've got this sort of juxtaposition between this beautiful date palm thriving on this manicured quarter-acre dream block, and then you've got that fallen timber in the water, and then you've got the Italian alders, which a lot of people have in Australia, and you've got those opposite from these brittle gums, which are natives.
I really love how you're able to interpret the nuance in the garden, Candy. It's really lovely. But another thing that I would say about that is that the Italian alders were also designed to represent sinking the roots in. And so when you come into the garden, you'll see they're in all of these awkward positions on this mound that trees don't normally grow. And so their roots have to dig deep. And it's sort of talking about digging your roots in and the resilience of those migrants that came to Australia, but also the resilience of Australian society. And I think that that's a really great theme for us to focus on in these times after the fires and in these times that we're experiencing now, the resilience of our society. And I think that's something that the museum has really tried to tap into with our Bridging the Gap Facebook page. So if you can go onto Facebook and have a look at that and add your stories, we'd really love to hear those too. Now we have another question from Nikki Osborne. Isn't there a tunnel through under the map? What does that represent? I'm so glad you asked that question. Yes, so in the video, you weren't able to see it, but there is a tunnel underneath the map, underneath the mound where Candy was standing in the video. Now, there's a few things that that's meant to represent, but I've been told it's actually shaped just like an inner ear canal. So when somebody is standing in the tunnel in the middle of the map, they can actually hear the sounds coming from around the garden as if there was a person standing right at the entrance. So it's really drawing that sound in. And then if you sort of look at the profile where the entrance to the tunnel is, it looks like somebody's come along with a Stanley knife and really carefully cut a nice line in the map and ripped it open. and then shoved that tunnel underneath. So it's about an ear underneath the surface of what's really going on in Australia, listening to what's going on under the surface, because that's sort of the themes that Raggett tried to get out with the architecture is, you know, history evolving, and if you're able to listen to what's really going on, you might actually catch those small stories that actually become big historic events over time.
That's what I was trying to ask you before, because I remembered you'd said that. It's true.
Now, we're just going to have to get your last questions coming through. So if you've got any further questions, start popping them in now. And just while you're doing that, I've got a last question for you guys, Candy and Sarah. What are your favourite personal experiences in the garden?
I'll start if you like.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, I particularly love watching adults come into the garden and they assess the space, they kind of look at the tunnel, and then they look at you and they notice you work there, and they look at you and they go, do I have to go through that tunnel? Is there something inside, like an exhibition? And the answer is no. It is literally just a tunnel that you can go through. But yeah, what about you guys?
That's funny.
Oh, I think it's just so interesting to watch the difference between how adults interact with the space and how children interact with the space. Children just rush in and they run all over things and are happy to break rules, and adults are really cautious. And I wonder if it's because some adults tend to think of history as factual and linear, and the garden's really forcing you to think outside the square of those boundaries.
Totally. Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? I actually can't help but love watching kids just run straight into the garden. They don't question it, they just see it as a fun space. But also then you'll after a while you'll get to sort of pick which dads are going to find their way into that tunnel and wait for kids to come in and go, whoa! Then you just know, yes, we've got a boogeyman. I love it. It never gets old.
Yeah. Also love the when kids, they look at the sign that says, please do not jump on our islands. They look around, they look at the sign again, and then they proceed to jump on the island. So it is really fun interacting with people in that space.
No boundaries, just like the architecture, really.
Yeah.
It's true.
All right, so do we have time for one last question? So we have one that I think, Sarah, might be for you. What is on the inside of the dream house?
Yeah, very interesting. So I did talk about the dream house in the video and related it to how it is blank. So it's painted white, and that's meant to be so visitors can come and project their dreams and thoughts onto the blank canvas. Much like the outside, the inside is actually quite bare as well. But one thing you may have not noticed in the video is that it doesn't have a roof. This is so people can come and they can go inside and look up into the sky and dream about their collective future, Australia's collective future. And yeah, apparently there used to actually be some beanbags inside, so you could lay down and look up into the sky that way. But I know Candy and Caitlin have a different idea about that.
Yeah, I'd heard about the beanbags, and apparently that was very early on. And I have heard through the grapevine that there was once a mattress on the ground, so I don't think that lasted very long because it's out in the elements, but that was where you could, you know, dead set, lie right back and gaze into the sky. So
Yeah, I actually heard it was a hammock. So I don't know.
yeah,
the stories of the museum.
Yeah, so the
but
legends say.
lying back in the hammock, and the sky's the limit for your dreams, and I think that's a really beautiful thing. Now we have time for one last question from Heather Finch. If you had to reimagine a feature of the garden to represent the great Australian dream currently, what would you do? That's such an interesting question.
Such a hard question.
I know. I don't know. I often talk about the dream house in terms of the great Australian dream, the time in Australia's history where, you know, in the 50s where paradise was affordable, people could buy their house on a quarter-acre block, and that really is meant to be talking to that time. And I always like to think about or talk to people my age about what that means to them today, because obviously, you know, to buy a house, it's a larger percentage of the income. And so how is that Australian dream? What sort of Australian dream is that? Or let's talk about that. What about you guys?
Yeah, look, you made me think of the dream house immediately. I mean, and it's already there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's amazing how in 20 years, our perception of just that one feature has changed.
There's actually one thing I can think of in particular that I always joke about with visitors is we have a wooden fence and it's like a backyard fence, but I always joke that it should be changed to colorbond now, so maybe that would be the change that I would make if we could.
Right, well, thank you so much for your engagement today, guys. We are so rapt to be able to do this. If you're not watching this live, then please still continue to ask questions that you might have, because this will be regulated and we can answer those questions after the fact. Please remember to tune in next week at 2 p.m. and we just really hope that we can see you in this place soon. We'll be in the garden, come and find us and we'll chat to you about any more questions you have. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. See ya.